Happening now, we'd like to welcome our viewers from across North America and around the world. Welcome to the EdTech Situation Room, episode 137 for June the 6th, 2019. I am Wes Fryer, coming to you from Oklahoma City, thrilled that the Google Hangout on Air has worked without a hitch right now, and maybe our Google blips are behind us. But Jason Neiffer is out on assignment this week, and I am absolutely delighted to be joined by Dave Quinn, EduQuinn on Twitter, who is coming to us all the way from the Northeast. And have you all floated away or been snowed away, or has life just been a perfect weather experience for you guys?
Well, it's funny you say that, Wes, because this year in my district, and I think this is similar for many, at least in my neck of Massachusetts, we only had one snow day. So the end of the school year is right upon us, and when we typically would have maybe another week or two to wrap up some of our projects, it's coming quickly to the end. So we're up against the clock. I've got my iPad collection ensemble on right now, so please excuse the hat. This is the
you know what?
I've got a 2-year-old
and iPad collection.
No haircut recently, so
there's no judgment. There's no judgment here. So this is the evening, and you're up super late on the East Coast time. So thanks for being willing to stay up. And so were you batching it? I've been batching it. The wife has been actually in Savannah, Georgia, with her sister. So I've had the girls, and we've fared okay. But anyway, but you guys aren't done with school. See,
no, we're not done with school. So my wife works evenings, and you've been kind enough to invite me on. I'm glad we finally got to connect. So a lot of times it's like tonight. Fortunately, Zach's asleep. My wife works evenings at a children's hospital in Providence, Rhode Island. But she was actually at her 10th college reunion last weekend. So I was batching it last weekend. But it's a lot of fun. Great watching my son learn and have all those engaging experiences with him. So.
Absolutely. Well, if anybody wants to go back in time, Dave was last on the show for episode 96 on May 30th, 2018. And for those that don't know you, Dave, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit? And you can even, if you want to, kind of explain the Beth Holland connection. And you were just telling me this awesome story about your kids doing great stuff with weather balloons and sensors and Raspberry Pi and talking to the state legislature, man. You're just doing some awesome stuff.
Yeah, so I work for an incredible district, the Mendon-Upton Regional School District in central Massachusetts. We're about, I'd say, 20 minutes east of the city of Worcester, about 45 minutes southwest of Boston. We're about a district of about 2,300 students. My role as the Director of Technology Integration is to work with teachers to utilize the or one-to-one iPads from 5 through 12, iPads in many of the classrooms in the elementary, to use those devices to create deep, meaningful learning experiences that's focused on creativity and, as my colleague John Clements, principal of Nipmuc Regional High School, often says, to do real work that matters. And today we had an example of that. Brian Crosby, who I met at EduCon, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago now, did an amazing session with Kevin Jarrett about his work with launching weather balloons. And it really piqued my curiosity. It took me a year or two, but convinced one of my colleagues in the engineering department to give it a try. And this past April, we had our third iteration, thanks to a grant from the MassQ organization and in partnership with Dr. Tori Trust of the UMass Amherst and the College of Education there. We launched 2 balloons. We had to go out west to Amherst because, while we're not that close to the coast, in weather balloon distance, we are. We've managed to lose some balloons to the Atlantic from time to time, but this past spring, we did the Global Space Balloon Challenge. Students launched a 1,500-gram balloon attached with a GoPro Fusion to capture a 360 experience of the trip. We also had a Raspberry Pi, which the students programmed to collect temperature and pressure and humidity data using a Sense hat. And then, we launch it with a spot GPS. We track it and we go track it down. And talk a little about the journey. We can share some links to the videos. It's really cool to see what a little bit of the southeastern New England looks like from about 80,000 feet. But we got a chance today, thanks again to MassQ for setting up this event called Education Evolution, where districts from around the state had a chance to showcase their work at the State House in this area called the Hall of Flags. We invited our state legislators to come on down to take a look at the work that we're doing, seeing where those tax dollars are invested. And needless to say, they were blown away, and I think justifiably so, based on the work that our students did. It was really nice to just kind of get out of their way and let them tell their stories, and just sit back, watch, snap a couple pictures, put them up on Twitter. But really fortunate to have that opportunity to just showcase the work that we're doing and show people what's possible in public schools. This is I think an example of what deeper learning could look like with purposeful tech integration, and just really excited to have that opportunity today, and proud of my students. I also want to mention my colleague Jim Gorman, who is the physics and engineering teacher, who was just instrumental in the science components of this work. I work on the tech side of it, and just the students understanding our application of physics to explain the whole trip was just a tribute to his efforts with those kids. So
that is fantastic. Fantastic. Well, I want to give a shout out to Beth Holland, who's BR Holland on Twitter as well, who is the reason that Dave and I got connected virtually. I don't think we've ever met face to face.
No, we haven't.
Maybe we did at an ISTE maybe together at the same time, but we never. If we had, we didn't know it. So we want to direct everyone to the show notes for this show, and definitely if you can drop in any of the quotes about the. You said it was the Global Space Balloon Challenge. Is that what it's called?
That was what it was part of, and then the presentation today was part of Massachusetts Computer Using Educators Education Evolution event. So share some of those. I'll share the links to the videos because I think they're really interesting. And as you start to circle around, if you can do it on a smartphone, it's really something special.
Man, that is just so fantastic. Well, we want to direct everyone to our links, which you can find at edtechsr.com/links. This is episode 137, so you'll be able to see all the links that we put into the show, which I'm sure we're not going to be able to cover. We usually don't. But you can hopefully go to the direct link to tonight's show and episode, and you'll be able to get to the ones that we do cover and address. And normally, and we, hey, this is a podcast, man, and nobody's paying us jack to be here. This is all fun. So we can do really whatever we want, but we are going to generally take a look at some news from the past week, maybe sometimes a little older, and then just talk a little about that through an educational lens. So I think I might start actually with a little Apple news. So WWDC, the Worldwide Developer Conference, is happening now in California. And Monday, we had the opening keynote. And interestingly, we may talk about this too, there was a big Google outage that happened on Sunday. I was listening to the Twit podcast, and they were wondering if that was going to overshadow things. I don't think it did. I didn't watch the whole keynote. I did just catch a little bit of it. But I guess one of the things, the new MacBook Pro, right? It's crazy. The monitor without a stand, well, the stand is $1,000.
$1,000, yeah, right.
Right. And then, but I think Jason actually might have the old MacBook Pro, the trash can MacBook, which is like 5 or 6 years old or something. It's been quite a while since it's been updated.
It's now a cheese grater.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that the cheese grater Mac, I think was the G5, and that harkens back to around 2005, probably 2004. I remember one of my bosses at Texas Tech when I was down in Lubbock, had one of those things. But one of the computer, I think they talked about 28 cores. I was listening on one of my Mac podcasts. I'll give a shout out to him. Mac Power Users. They interviewed Doug Brooks, who is the product manager for the Power Mac, and he was talking about how Apple is designing for the future, right? So doing 4K video editing is not a norm for most people today, but that's what they're designing for, is the future and 3D rendering and all of that. So anyway, that of all the different articles and things I read, that whole idea of, designing for the future. And you were mentioning before we got on the show how you've been reading Creativity Inc. that's about Pixar. So there's a lot of great thinking there in terms of just the ways we design structures and rooms and, a culture for interaction and for creativity. So anything stand out for you as far as the Apple event or any of the announcements this week?
I think what's catching a lot of headlines is the mouse for the iOS devices. I know that in my role as a tech director, I've gotten that request a couple times. I've kind of gotten used to the touch screen. I do think that there are times when I do need more precision for that interaction piece. But generally speaking, I think what's really interesting is kind of interested on the price point of that the new Pro. I think what was the highest end was about a $35,000 machine.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I do appreciate the thoughtfulness in terms of designing for the future. I know there's also a little bit of I think discomfort's the wrong word, but as any new MacBook Pro user knows, that with the USB-C, right? I think ultimately having kind of a universal port where you can connect is going to be beneficial. But that transition, as many of your older devices and support technology is not there yet. Having to have the adapter piece is a bit cumbersome. But I think it's a lot of the little things that go into being forward thinking, and I appreciate Apple's desire to continue to design for the future, to set the market, and then even when it doesn't work the way in which they envisioned, it doesn't seem to deter them from trying, and they hit a lot more often than they miss. So I'm excited to see what comes of it. I'm looking forward to seeing what those new developments bring, and particularly as they can get those price points down and the future becomes the present. So excited to see that.
Well, hey, shout out to both Peggy George and Scott Summer, who are live in our chat room. Yes, I do. I got another device so I can monitor the chat. I guess we did have chat last week. 2 weeks ago, we didn't on Zoom. So anyway, shout out there. If you are joining us live, please feel free to join in the chat in the back channel. One of the things I'd like to ask you about iPads a little bit, because you're iPad 1-to-1, and I think we're going to have some pretty significant conversations this year. We are BYOD at our high school and have a menagerie of Chrome as well as Mac devices and even some Windows. We have a Windows lab still, and then we got a lot of Chromebooks and then some iPads. Anyway, we have a lot of different devices, but nothing required. Yes, the link on the mouse functionality stood out, but the thing that I did see in the keynote, maybe it was a replay, but it had to do with accessibility. Apple has always been exceptional with regard to accessibility and just building it in for everyone. And the thing that was amazing in this video I saw was how you could use your voice to control the screen, and then you could say something like, show with the numbers. And for instance, on a Google map, it would divide the screen into different numbers, and then you could say 5. And so it would be like you're tapping on that. And that really seemed like, wow, what a great idea in terms of wanting somebody who is impaired or challenged in some way as far as physical touch, being able to use their voice to command. And I definitely, I've had some trouble actually recently with my Google Home Assistant and Home, but overall, and then with Siri all the time on my phone, I'm using my voice more than ever as an input device. So I definitely was impressed by that, and it's good to see Apple continue to lead that charge. I think overall, though, on the Pro stuff, I don't think that's going to be affecting us in education and schools. But what it hopefully is going to do is to continue to carve out a space for pro users. I think a lot of people, since the Mac Pro line, hadn't been updated, have moved to, Dell Precision workstations and other, Windows machines. And so anyway, I'm glad to see that kind of support. As I think they said in that podcast, maybe for those of us that love the Mac, we may not be using that, super pro high-end pro machine, but it's also kind of, cool that it's there, and that power and that possibility is there. And certainly the idea of designing for the future, that reminds of, Wayne Gretzky. He doesn't skate to the puck. He skated to where the puck was going to be. And that's part of what we're continually challenged to do in schools and in educational technology specifically, is, trying to anticipate how things are changing and then moving. Where are you guys? How long have you had the iPads, and where are you today with your thinking about, I guess, satisfaction, happiness, and overall, are you getting to do what you want to do and your teachers want to do with the devices that you have?
Yeah, I think having the Mac infrastructure across the board, so where all of our teachers have MacBooks themselves, the students are one-to-one iPad 6th generation. I think that we just did a massive refresh last summer, actually. And I don't think there was ever really serious consideration with going for another device, in part because of our infrastructure, but also I think that Apple really responded to the pressure that was coming from Chromebooks, and got their price point on the most recent device down to something that districts could swallow. For a case, it's about I think the number is $294 for a device when you buy in 10. If combined with the Logitech rugged combo case, I think that's the name of it. I've got one in my bag. While it's expensive, I just fell in love, and I wish we had the resources to be able to provide that type of case for everybody. We were able to do it at the elementaries, because then you get what is, I think, is a really you get the best of both worlds. You get the feel of a laptop, but with that detachable keyboard, with the high-end media that you're able to create with the Apple devices. It's just really wonderful.
If you could drop the link later into the show notes for that, I'd love to see that. And I know Carl Hooker, who's down in Eanes ISD, I think their last refresh, they also went with a Bluetooth keyboard and have found that to be, great. So
well, this is interesting because it's not actually a Bluetooth keyboard. The case plugs into the Lightning port.
Really? Okay.
And then it has those, excuse my lack of memory, but it has those 3 prongs that connect in, that's on the Pro. What's that piece called that's on the iPad that shoot, I'm drawing a blank on it. But anyhow, the keyboard's connected directly in through the case. So you don't have to worry about Bluetooth where you got 30 kids in the classroom.
Oh, nice.
Trying to connect to it. It's hardwired, direct connection. It worked really well for our state testing at the elementary level. Not that that's the focus, but we're really satisfied. I wish the repair process was a little bit less costly. We haven't been able to find a lot of companies do a really good job overall with the repair with the glass. I think that's our biggest challenge. But no company that consistently produces the quality of what Apple comes back to. And as we may have to recycle these devices to give to another student as transfers happen, we're going through Apple for all of our repairs. So again, we've been really satisfied, and I think it goes back to something we were talking about at the top of the hour before we got started. Apple, to me, is really much like Disney focuses on the user experience, right? They try to continually create the optimal experience. They're always iterating, and even when the public reaction, well, this new latest iOS didn't really have that many significant upgrades. If you take a step back, those and look at it over a longitudinal scale, it's really significant in terms of how they've been continually responding to the market. I've got a session that I'm running with some students tomorrow, elementary students, But talking about just screencasting and a feature that wasn't possible, a couple years ago on the device. And then the clips. I don't know if you've played with Apple Clips. That's a really user-friendly media component that I think we're going to find out tomorrow, but even kindergartners can use.
And the speech to text on that, I used that for the first time at the Atlas conference a couple years ago, and that technology is phenomenal, right? Yep. The ability, and it's not every language, and it's not going to be every accent and everything, but it certainly gives you a pretty amazing start at a transcription to then go in and edit. And again, accessibility, right? If we were all working at a university or we're publishing content, depending upon funding and whatnot, I mean, there are mandates for accessibility. So these are really big things that we need to keep in mind. And it's awesome that Apple tools are, allow us to create with that kind of accessibility, built in.
Well, and I think another piece of it, speaking of accessibility, one of the things that we're encountering in my district is we're seeing, like many districts across the country, increase in students whose first language is not English, coming to us from different parts of the world. And what I like about the iPad is that you can set it up in different languages. I just wish we could find, and maybe it's a lack of knowledge on my part. Still trying to find ways to set up the device so that students have access to it both in their native language and in English, as we're trying to develop those skills, particularly with websites, and trying to find an app that works well for translation. We've got a significant number of students who are coming from Portuguese-speaking countries. The apps that have been provided, particularly let's say that are password protected, haven't been able to get translated, so we're running into some obstacles there. But I think that hopefully is kind of the next accessibility piece. If they could ever find a way for the devices, particularly with all the investment that they're doing for education, to support non-native speaking students, to kind of get the best of both worlds, particularly with digital web content.
Okay, a couple other things from the chat room, and then from the Apple event. Scott points out that he says iPad OS is going to be big, especially to have a desktop version of Safari for iPad will give Chromebooks some competition. And definitely the return on investment and how long you're keeping these devices. Yeah. We've invested in Chromebooks, and just, it is attractive when you look at price points, but how long do you keep these things and how long do they work really well for you? That's a critical question. And then Peggy's shopping for a new iPad. I'm using one of the new, brand new USB-C only, speakers on both sides. It's like $1,000 iPad with the Apple Pencil 2. And so we had some of our teachers actually pilot this with the idea of, hey, would this be a desktop or laptop replacement? And our conclusion overall, my conclusion, I'll speak for myself, is that for our teachers who are used to a laptop, we did not pair this with either a Bluetooth keyboard or a keyboard like you're describing, that just plugs in. We did provide a separate, did we? I don't think we did. We had talked about getting that new keyboard that's the fold-on keyboard and everything that's sold with it. Anyway, I'm not convinced at this point, because this is like $1,000 iPad. I think it's going to be a challenging shift if a teacher's just kind of in a one-off situation, trying to think, oh, maybe I can give up my laptop and switch to this. I think if all your students are using iPad, there's a lot to be said for teachers having the same device, so at least in the same device family, maybe not the same model, but if your kids all have iPads, obviously teachers all need to have iPads, and they need to be creating on those devices. So yes, Peggy, this is an iPad Pro, and the memory and the capabilities of this, and it's stunning. I mean, I honestly really love the Face ID, but those things are kind of icing on the cake. It's not really a core feature. So today, because we're making recommendations for a couple faculty this summer that are just chomping at the bit to start producing content and creating videos, especially at high school, we're changing our schedule, and there's going to be a change in how much instructional time, et cetera. my recommendation has been the Wi-Fi only iPad, 128 gigs of RAM, 128 gig storage to be able to have enough room, for that video content. But then getting the Generation 1 Apple Pencil and then the Explain Everything app. That's still my favorite, creation app on the iPad. I mean, the Apple Pencil 2, I think that the one is just as magical as far as being able to draw and everything, but it is nice that, of course, I don't have a case that does this, but so I have to take the case off. But I mean, it's cool that you can just put it right on there, and it's magnetic. The most un-Apple thing about the Apple Pencil Generation 1 is you actually take a cap off and stick it in the end, which makes you feel like, I mean, this thing is going to break. I haven't had a break, but anyway, Peggy, I'd recommend you just go with a 32 or 128 gig, Wi-Fi only standard iPad and get an Apple Pencil. I think, educationally, it's about $300. I think with a discount, you might be able to get it for a little less than $320 or something like that. And the pencil's going to set you back, $90 bucks or $100 or something like that. But I definitely, for me, I had a chance with one of our math teachers last week, because we do a week of professional development and meetings after school's done. And we've had several different math teachers at different levels go ahead and make the change from a smartboard to an iPad. And one of them is using the smartboard app, because she has a lot in the Smart Notebook application, but most are using Explain Everything. And it is so fun to be able to show them and have them experience the precision of the Apple Pencil and the being able to mark stuff up, whether you're doing live teaching or you want to record. It is just really, really amazing. And I think we are very biased today towards the keyboard, and we tend to think that, that's it. That's what everybody's got to have. But I mean, especially if you're teaching math, but even if you're teaching other things, being able to use a stylus, of course, that adds cost as well as your voice and these things. These are important parts of the computing environment. But for our teachers today, where we're not iPad one-to-one, I think the iPad is a powerful tool, but I don't see it at this point as a laptop replacement. I think I'm still continuing to create most of my content on a laptop. It just depends. Some things lend themselves better to the iPad, but I'm also not, I don't have a keyboard on my iPad, so that would be a little different if I did. So.
Well, so I think you bring up a really good point with the smartboard comparison, because it's something we've been really reflecting on. Particularly with the costly investment in smart boards, what you could provide to not only the teachers but the students if you're not in a one-to-one district. One of my personal challenges with smart board is that it can be a passive technology for the rest of the students who are not up at it, versus with, let's say, a tablet or an iPad with Explain Everything, the collaboration feature, the real-time collaboration feature, and the annual subscription Explain Everything is just mind-blowing. And now we've got a situation, particularly you pair it with an Apple TV, students can show their screen, or if you're on the Explain Everything collaboration piece, you're working on a problem in real time. If it were totally up to me, and I know everybody's got their preferences and they've built in their practice, I think, talk about looking towards the future. That's the way to go. I have a cousin who works in video game tech, one of the bigger firms, and he was talking about how he was going to different schools for his son, and some of the schools were promoting smart boards, and he looked at me confused as telling the story. He's like, I'm in a high tech company, and we have no use for these smart boards. Like, nobody works like this.
Well, here's the truth.
Why is it such a selling point?
Here's a true story. We've got a few old smart boards that are in an annex building, and we probably should have sold those 5 years ago. The resellers we've been talking to are like, no, there's just pretty much no value to these at all. So if we were to go down that pathway, and we definitely have peer schools doing that, we're looking at more interactive touch televisions, but sometimes those are Android based, etc. So it's going to be interesting. We've made a sizable investment in Apple TVs, and being able to be untethered wherever you want to be in your room. Just the pedagogical benefit of that, of being able to be anywhere in the room with your students, not fixed at the front or the back.
Yep.
That's tremendous. And I love that liberating power. And so I think, that will certainly be something that I'll share as we talk about our different options and what we should look at using and doing. I want to pick up two more Apple articles, and then we can jump to something else. Microsoft demonstrated Minecraft Earth at WWDC. I did get to see part of that demo, and that is like Pokemon Go. So we're thinking augmented reality, but it's Minecraft, and it's being able to build not only yourself, but also collaboratively, but you're seeing those things through the lens of your iPad or the screen of your iPad or your iPhone. I really personally don't think AR is going to take off that much until it really gets into the glasses and becomes much more natural rather than we're holding up our screens. But Pokemon Go is a huge craze, and Minecraft has a pretty big following. And so that's going to be pretty interesting to see where that goes. And it may, I don't know. We'll have to see what the iOS requirement is in terms of hardware for running that. But that might be a pretty cool thing to do at school. We're doing different Minecraft education projects and stuff like that. And being able to build something in physical space, on the school campus, and thinking about that, anyway, that reminds a little bit about sort of Ready Player One and, the merging of the virtual, with the physical. And then there was one other article we put in this week for Apple. This is a TechCrunch article on June 4th. With antitrust investigations looming, Apple reverses course on bans of parental control apps. And this is a pretty big thing as far as digital citizenship. I know I've heard from some of our parents who have used different apps. And this is interesting, right? Because as a school or an enterprise, we deploy mobile device management in order to have control and monitoring over devices. And so companies have used that same technology to enable parents to do that. But of course, everybody's not necessarily a responsible parent who's doing that kind of stuff. And so there's all kinds of issues with people, using those kinds of technologies for spying and harassment and other things like that. And it's really interesting because the antitrust stuff, is arguing that Apple's a monopoly and this monopolistic control over the store. Yet there's an important case to be made that Apple's control over their store is one of the reasons why iOS remains so secure. And, we've got some articles under the security title, this week that we can talk about as far as Android and those kind of things. So any comments about those? Are you a Minecrafter, or do you have Minecrafting students at school?
Yeah, tons of students at school. I am not a Minecrafter myself. Have a immense respect for Steve Isaacs and the work that he does. There are just so many different avenues we could go down that would be a worthwhile one. I just haven't. I guess I've more focused on Raspberry Pi work with students, but have just a lot of respect for that work. I tend to agree with you with AR. We're not quite there yet. But if we merge the two, if we can start building worlds immersive, or helping students to build immersive worlds within, let's say Minecraft, where they're exploring through goggles, going back to the story with the Education Evolution event, the experience of seeing something in 360, being able to look around. I just remember as a kid, the first time I played Mario 64, and we weren't running in lines, we were running in space, was just, mind-blowing. And we were talking about at the beginning, top of the hour, the experience, right? When we get to the point where it's truly a transformational experience, more so than, I guess, kind of kitschy, I think that's when you're really going to see the power of AR to transform the learning experience. Just a lot of cool stuff, but I think it's a little bit more entertaining. And then once the kids have seen the AR, it doesn't lose its does the novelty. Is novelty what's getting them right now, and then all of a sudden not as novel anymore.
Well, where's the creative potential too, right? Like the what's that VR cube? The whatever that is, I'm not thinking of it, but I have few of those. Yeah, well, it's not Erasmus, but there's a cube. That, I don't have it. I have it in my office at school, but it's the cube, and then you got the different apps, that you can use to look at the solar system and be able to look at different stuff. And yeah, that it's a lot more like to me the flash in the pan. Ooh, look at this! Isn't this amazing? Doesn't have the depth of, okay, now let's go create with it. And that's one of the best things, of course, about Minecraft is being able to, hey, let's replicate our middle school building. Hey, let's build something else collaboratively, and being able to create and having that authorship in the hands of students instead of just, it's like not just watching a movie. Let's make a movie. Let's not just watch one. So,
well, and I think that it also is going to require faculty members to take a dive into it themselves. A lot of the work that gets done with students is stuff that they're doing and they're learning on their own, and they're bringing into the classroom, and the teachers are amazed. But imagine if you had a teacher who had an understanding of those, both AR and Minecraft, and can pose the questions or provide that support to help kids take it to that next level.
Absolutely.
I think that's going to be the piece that's the tipping point to make it really meaningful. But as of right now, it's a space for kids to bring an interest into school and to connect content with a relevant context, and to make school a place that feels more like relatable to them.
Scott Summer in the chat room points out that's the merge cube that I was trying to think of. And that's the key thing for administrators to have an eye for too, is if what we're doing with technology is really this fancy, glitzy, let's just get people to ooh and ah. I mean, that's as bad as in the early days of the smart board, where we were all like, oh, parents, look, we can touch it and it changes. And, people got so carried away that I don't think they were pedagogically thinking about students and beyond the delivery model. And yes, that is exciting to see what it can do. And frankly, the bringing in the projector, I mean, that's what in many schools the smartboard heralded, was the first time a reasonably decent maybe a data projector for the first time was brought into the classroom. And in a lot of rooms, that is what the smartboard was used for, was just basically, a glorified, well, not glorified, just an expensive projector. And that's a big deal. But thinking about the student experience, you were talking about that before we started, the student experience. What is the student experience? How does AR today, change the student experience? And, our goal is not to enthrall students and not to entertain them. It is to engage them and to inspire them and to help provide experiences that they have to, broaden their horizons, get their minds, stretched, and ask questions, and then want to do stuff. What was it? What did you say about real work? I like that quote.
Real work that matters, right?
Real work that matters, right? Yeah. How do we do that?
Well, and also, I want to throw a shout out to Dan Ryder, who talks about no more dumpster projects, right? How do we avoid the project where we have community comes in and then takes a look at the project, and then within 20 minutes or at the end of the day, everything ends up, in the dumpster behind the school. What was really nice is I was walking out of or dismissal at the high school, and I saw these kids holding basically brown paper bagged wrapped, parcels. And I was trying to figure out what it was, and it was all of their artwork for the year, all with their name on it. And the kids were taking it home, and I didn't see any of them in the dumpster. They were all proud to take it back. They were going to, either keep it or hang it up. And how do we have more opportunities for students to take that home and feel the same way about that, whatever the piece of work it is that they're working on?
My 18-year-old who's finishing her gap year commented at dinner tonight about the high school that she needs to throw away, all these folders and things like that. So I love, I love that no dumpster projects. So we got a couple other topics. We've got about 20 more minutes or so if we stick with about an hour. So tech correction, privacy, China censorship, security, any of those grab your attention and you want to dive into next?
Yeah, I'm happy to dive into any of them. The tech correction jumped out. Particularly you had the YouTube bans on neo-Nazi and Holocaust denial videos and a push against hate speech. That was really interesting, particularly because I've been a big fan of Mike Caulfield's work, at Holden on Twitter. And I think he's doing yeoman's work in the public square to help teachers, both at the K-12 and at the higher ed level, um, work with students on information literacy, and how to navigate these types of spaces. I linked in the show notes. It's the second link, but the curation and search radicalization spiral. And it talks about how, once you get into these spaces that have quite a bit of hate speech, they start using terms or phrases or very cherry picked framing that seems subtle and harmless on the basis, but when people start using some of the search terms that are embedded, they're not actually academic terms, and it only links you to other hate sites. So then you end up going down these spirals of links that engage in confirmation bias, and it starts to take people who wouldn't ordinarily be, people you would think become radicalized, start spending time in these spaces, and they get these reinforced messages where they think they're actually doing research, but they're actually getting linked back to the same groups, the same sites all over again. And I think the SIFT approach that he talks about in the first link, I think is really useful for teachers and students for just any sort of web navigation. When you're introduced to a piece of text or information, so SIFT stands for stop, then investigate the source. So who is it that's providing me with this information? Is there a way? The F in SIFT is to find better coverage. Is there another source that can, is improved or has more validity or reliability, that has a better reputation? And then as you're going through the source, can you trace the claims, the quotes, and the media backs to the original context? Because as Mike points out, oftentimes articles are based off of the links in earlier articles, and sometimes we don't spend enough time going back and tracing the quotes and the context in which the quotes came from, or if the quote within the article is actually reliable to begin with. So it's much like Wikipedia. The power is in the footnotes, and how do you figure out, how do you separate the reality versus the cherry picked? And I think that this process and a lot of the work that he's doing is an incredibly valuable resource to build, not just digital citizens, but both analog and digital citizens. So please check out his work. It's really fantastic.
Dave, you may have been the person that put me on to him. I think you were, and that became huge in the Atlas workshop I put together on filtering the exoflood and media literacy. Phenomenal, textbook and part of the digital polarization project. He's working with lots of universities. I think it's worth reading some quotes from this article. This is from Ars Technica, yesterday on June 5th. It says, quote, this is the YouTube statement. Today, we're taking another step in our hate speech policy by specifically prohibiting videos alleging that a group is superior in order to justify discrimination, segregation, or exclusion based on qualities like age, gender, race, caste, religion, sexual orientation, or veteran status, YouTube's announcement said. Quote, this would include, for example, videos that promote or glorify Nazi ideology, which is inherently discriminatory. Finally, we will remove content denying that well-documented violent events like the Holocaust or the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary took place. This is freaking huge. I mean, we have had folks yelling for and advocating and doing everything possible to try to get, Google and YouTube to make decisions about content. And they've been, embarrassed, as they should be, with the, pedophile, thing that was a couple months ago, as far as pedophiles using videos of young kids and the comments and the ways in which the algorithm itself can just spin you into a dark place.
Mm-hmm.
And so later in the article, they talk about how YouTube employees really push their executives to take action. And hey, man, this also speaks to voice, right? We talk about student voice. This is employee voice at Google, right? Thank you, YouTube and Google employees for speaking out. Thanks to everybody who's been speaking out about this, because it's a huge move for YouTube to be gatekeeping content in this way. And this is the world that we live in. I think people have had this idealized vision that, we should just not have, any kind of content censorship at all, and the world will be beautiful and glorious. Well, the algorithms which have been created by YouTube programmers are optimized for attention. That's why autoplay is on by default. You have to turn it off. And one of the things all of this reminds me of, and I'm definitely going to check out the links for SIFT and that search radicalization spiral. I've just been doing some reading. I think this is Noah Harari's 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. We are so filled today with headlines that are designed to grab us emotionally, and get us to just share a headline. And I'm reminded that, and I think this is perhaps in that book or in some other places I've been reading, the early days of the blogosphere, which I know Peggy and Scott and others who are listening, I mean, you had to be more thoughtful. You put something out on your blog. There wasn't Twitter. There wasn't Facebook. You took ownership for that, but then you would, generally include links, and the velocity of sharing was much slower. And I think that's actually a challenge that we have today. And like you're talking about with SIFT, if it starts with stop, I think Mike Caulfield also talks about click restraint, and I've heard other literacy folks talk about that. Like when you are being emotionally grabbed by something, when you are responding, that's probably by design. Somebody is wanting you to respond in that way. And so being able to hit a pause button, be more thoughtful, slow, basically let off of the accelerator. This is something that we're going to have to really work on, because the information landscape that we're in is highly biased, highly prejudiced against deep thinking, against slow consideration of ideas. And it is really, and I'm actually trying to work on this just myself personally, because I have found myself reading so little long form work and just more, skimming stuff. And it's a brain thing, right? I think we really are going to have to take control of our brains and not, just fall prey to this. Hey, let's look at headlines. Hey, let's just, let our brains be fed with all this information and get these endorphins, because we're not going to be doing the kind of quality thinking which we need to be doing as educators and citizens if we're falling prey to all that in the social media landscape. So how do you deal with all of that?
I think that I have a couple thoughts here. Number one, going back to Mike's work, is that the habit, it was originally, SIFT is an extension of the 4 moves in a habit. The habit is, if anything strikes you emotionally, which you're going back to, but I think a lot of times we think of that as like negative emotions, gets me angry, but also if something gets me happy, right? I think that's a time to really pump the brakes, and that should set off an alarm that you need to read it more carefully. I think secondly, going to your point about long form and thinking and deliberative, I think of the book Thinking Fast and Slow, our System 1 versus System 2 analogy of the System 1's kind of that rapid processing. System 2 is that deep thinking, which our brains really don't want to do. It's hard. It's energy consuming. We avoid it at all costs by nature. So we're not just focusing on, it's not just necessarily a tech problem. It's a human problem, an awareness problem. I think it was Dan Willingham who wrote, it's not that students are more distracted than before. It's just that if you got a laptop in your classroom, the threshold that it takes to go find something else has just been lowered. It's a lot easier to get that next endorphin hit from something that you like a little bit better. I think the last point I wanted to make, going back to this this Google this YouTube declaration, I kind of want to link in Facebook here in a minute. It's based on a conversation I had at the Connected Learning Summit. I think it was 2 falls ago with a gentleman from Germany. We were just talking about free speech. And one interesting observation he made is that while European countries, particularly Germany, values free speech, it can't come at the expense of human dignity, right? And that's the core value that they trump more. And it's good to see that YouTube is taking steps to first address that human dignity piece, so that free speech is not weaponized. I know it's a really challenging line to figure out where the censorship is in terms of trying to suppress, suppressing free speech to continue oppression versus human dignity. It's a really difficult space to navigate. But I think it's an important thing to consider when we're discussing this topic. And I think this also ties into the Pelosi video that Facebook continued to post, even with the caveats of, well, we're going to let people make up their own mind on this topic. And I don't know if you've discussed this on a previous episode of the show. I'm curious on your thoughts to that policy, and particularly in the context of what we're talking about with System 1 and System 2, that fast thinking, confirmation biased nature that we have as humans, versus doing that deeper read into, hey, we're going to put a warning up here, but the big video that's going to captivate your attention and reinforce your beliefs, we're going to leave that up. But any thoughts on that, particularly in light of what YouTube just decided to do?
Well, in our second hour, we'll be taking our
with just about 2 minutes left.
No, so I'm very pessimistic about elections in 2020. I think we've only begun to see the poisonous produce of the weaponization of social media. I don't think that we've taken the steps that need to be taken. I think that some of the basic assumptions of platforms like YouTube and Facebook that basically just grant any of us the opportunity to publish an unlimited quantity of video on their platform actually needs to be questioned. And I'm not saying like the open web is bad, but when I put up a blog post, or if I put up a video that I'm hosting, that's very different in its potential virality than content which is put onto YouTube or put onto Facebook. And I really think this is an example of where there's a lot of unintended consequences that are happening now, and the negative effects of these things. Again, I'm coming off of reading Noah Harari. He really is saying that we need to, perhaps rethink, governance and some of the basic assumptions that we make about liberal democracy in terms of people being able to be autonomous and not being manipulated, et cetera. I think that we're going to need to question those. And I'm fearful of government regulation, the idea of the government coming in and deciding, what speech to allow. But I think that this decision by YouTube and Google to take out this content is very good. We saw Apple, I don't know, 6 months ago or a good while back, take InfoWars and some of that content off their platform. If you're a platform owner and creator, you have some responsibility for what occurs on your platform. What was this podcast I listened to? This was a fantastic one. I'll have to see if I've got my history in my pocket cast, because this was a law professor who was talking about, it's basically the provisions of U.S. law, which said, platforms are not responsible for their content. And so they're saying the people that say regulation, isn't, needed or whatever. I mean, it's actually regulation that has allowed a lot of this to happen, because if we didn't have that law, okay, here it is. This is the Reason podcast, which I think is it's a libertarian, leaning podcast, which is fine. I mean, I like to hear things from all different, aspects of the political spectrum. But the title is Why Insta Pundit Glenn Reynolds Thinks Twitter, Facebook, and Google Should Be Busted Up. And so one of the points that he makes in this podcast is that it's that part of the law which is letting them off the hook entirely in the United States. And so he's making the case that those platforms and the virality of the content that's shared there, has just really amped up the velocity with which things are shared, and the, environment that we have where clickbait and headlines and videos. And there was a really great video that the Veritaseum, if I'm saying that right, creator did about thumbnails and just the ways that the algorithms in YouTube it's just making it more and more clickbaity, And so if you're going to want to get to 1 million plus views or whatever, which how many of us are doing that? But anyway, for those people that are creating that kind of content, we have a long way to go, and we have important stuff to figure out. So I think this is an important thing to share with students, to take that back to the classroom and educational level. Like, we got some really big problems to figure out, and we've got really, really smart people. In fact, I think you could say, the smartest and best paid programmers in the world are working on all this stuff, trying to figure it out. They're not able to do that. And so we're going to need to continue to engage, and our voices are important, whether we are speaking as citizens, we're speaking as shareholders. Yeah, so that's a long answer, but it's a mess. I don't think that we have seen the depth that we're going to see with regard to the weaponization of these platforms, and we need smart, ethical folks who are not only in places of elective office and officials who are making those decisions, but are who are working for companies, who are writing the code. And we've got roles to play as citizens too. So it's exciting that you were taking kids to the State House today, right? Being involved, being connected, because we need to have our voices heard, and we need to speak out about this stuff, because laissez-faire does not, look at the nation of Haiti if you want to see. I don't know. I mean, that's not a perfect analogy, but it's such a dramatic as the poorest country in the hemisphere, which used to be beautiful with mahogany wood and everything else. It's horrible. There's a lot of stuff that happened there that led to that. But, we need to be regulating people's behavior at some level. And I think that we in the United States and perhaps globally have some important thinking to do about that, because, and this isn't a political show, but we've had some folks really demonize the idea of regulation and government. And in the case specifically of what we're talking about with the weaponization of social media and the ways that these platforms are arguably destroying democracy. If you haven't seen the Carol Caldwaller TED Talk that she gave about a month ago in Silicon Valley with Larry Page and Sergey Brin in the room, and I think Zuckerberg and who's his came over from Yahoo, number 2 at Facebook.
Chamber? Charles Chamber?
Yes, I think that's right. She says that Brexit was the worst electoral fraud in over 100 years in England. They passed laws to stop people from taking luggage and suitcases full of money and just giving it out to people, and the ways in which their electoral system was broken by social media and the ability to have all of this targeted advertising, hidden from public view, et cetera, that they got to step up, because they've created monsters that are threatening the core foundations of liberal democracy. That's some pretty big allegations. So it's a good TED Talk to look at, and definitely something good to, I mean, if we can touch it, right? Because all this polarization can feel like an electric fence at school that, okay, we don't want to touch that. We may not talk about that. Parents are going to be upset. We've got to find ways to have civil dialogue around these issues. And we need to grapple with these things, because they're real issues out there. So.
And that's, one of the things, and this comes back to the whole aspect of citizenship, and again, digital or analog, or however you want to frame it, is that, when we talk about regulation and government, if we allow government to be this alien body that's out of our control, and we just, use it as a means of either blame or just abstraction, then that's a problem. But government, when we drill down, is really us, and either we abdicate that responsibility to be active within the governance of the hard work of self-governing, or we don't, and we oftentimes get the government that we deserve when we're not fully engaged with it. So if we're having a problem with government, I think we need to take a long, hard look in the mirror and ask ourselves, to what extent are we contributing to that challenge? Because when functioning properly, we would take an active role, and it wouldn't be this alien entity.
Absolutely. Peggy George asked for the link to that TED Talk. It's called Carol Caldwaller, Facebook's Role in Brexit and the Threat to Democracy. It was from TED Talks in April of 2019, and we included that in episode 132 from April the 24th. Definitely worth checking out. I think we may need to go just a slight bit past the top of the hour. This has been a great conversation, and we've barely scratched the surface. I think let's see. I want to. There's a couple more things we'll just mention. Then we'll just have to do some Geeks of the Week and get out of here. China, Tiananmen Square. This is massive, right? So this is the 30-year anniversary of Tiananmen Square, and I dropped a couple links in here from the BBC. June 3rd, Tiananmen's Tank Man: The Image That China Forgot. The reporter there has taken some incredible risks with a laptop, walking around, and I don't know if he was in Beijing or Shanghai or where he was, showing this image, and folks that did not recognize it, but also perhaps people that got angry. How dare you? How dare you share that? Going to the university, and students did know about that, but probably the most censored image in the world, and that whole incident of those in Tiananmen Square who opposed the massacre that took place. There's another article called Tiananmen Square: The Moment a Student Leader Returns for the First Time. We got really interesting stuff that's hard to decipher, happening right now with Huawei and 5G and the federal government and our current administration, trade war. I dropped a Business Insider article from June 1st saying Huawei has reportedly stopped several smartphone production lines after U.S. blacklist amidst trade war. Concerns over espionage and the ways in which, next generation 5G networks may be tapped by their manufacturer if Chinese devices are the ones that are permitted to be installed. Here's my big thought on Tiananmen and surveillance overall. Okay, there should be some significant differences, not only in what we teach in school, but in what our policies are and what our advocacy is for in the United States of America when it comes to surveillance technologies and when it comes to issues of privacy and freedom of expression. We need to make sure that students today know about Tank Man, that they know about Tiananmen Square. The Chinese government continues to hold power and to advance a very different agenda of political rights and freedoms than we have in the United States and that are part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And we need to remember how heavily censored China is. We've mentioned this on the show, and the fact that our podcasts, even now, these videos are being transcribed. I don't know. It'll be interesting. I hope I get to travel in China again, and I don't want to impede and harm myself and my ability to travel there, because I have talked about the Uyghur minority population in Western China and the ways in which they're being oppressed, because of satellite imagery. We believe, the West believes, there's thousands and thousands, I think, if not, well, I'll say thousands. I don't know if it's millions. There's a lot of people that are in relocation and education camps in China today, and in that western province of China, it is the most repressive and oppressive surveillance environment that I think exists anywhere in the world today. And there was one other article I put in under privacy, and I got this from This Week in Tech. This is from the Associated Press on June 1st. The U.S. is now seeking social media details from all visa applicants. And this is past or present, right? Any account that you've ever had. So what is this going to do in terms of chilling speech for immigrants who might have something to say about the United States of America? I think that the issues here are really important. And certainly from an educational standpoint and thinking about technology, we need to have our students be aware of the Great Firewall of China, the ways in which freedom is restricted. And this is also part of citizenship, right? We have rights and we have responsibilities as citizens. And a really important part of digital citizenship is student voice. And it's the opportunity to responsibly and appropriately and hopefully respectfully express your ideas and advocate for the kinds of changes that you'd like to see in your community, in your state, and in your world. These are all important. And I think the 30-year anniversary of Tiananmen Square should be a good reminder to all of us about the importance of talking about these issues. End of rant. Comments?
It brings to mind some of the subtler things that are going on within uh, U.S. education. Bill Fitzgerald had a post about how one school had imposed facial recognition software, and under the guise of security and safety, we're just trying to. I think, and again, I didn't. Forgive me for not reading the article, but I think it was a justification for stopping criminals, right? And then all of a sudden now everybody's facial recognition is in the building, and to what end, and to they're just using it for safety for now. I think there was another article in Ed Week about how companies have been founded that have used AI to scan social media accounts of students with trigger words, and kids have been flagged for, using. I think what was the example in Ed Week? I think um, let's see, using the reference, I would die for you. The comic book artist wrote, and then taking that quote out of context, it flagged students' social media account, caused a big brouhaha. I think that we need to have a better awareness of what's going on. I want to assume that these companies are well intentioned, but I also think that there's a market for profiteering off of the nerves of schools. And I think you had another article in there about ransomware. What was in Baltimore? We had a city, I think it was Leominster up in Massachusetts, that had had to pay $10,000 to get his website unlocked. So how much is the use of fear being leveraged to provide protection? To use the old mafia term, but what we're really doing is we're ceding our rights in small ways that we're not cognizant of, and what are the long-term impacts of these decisions that we're agreeing to. It's just I think there's just a lot of lack of awareness. So what happens to your DNA when it's swabbed for 23andMe, right? We talked about that the last time we were together, but it's something we've. I don't think adults are aware of it, so we can't pass it on to kids. And then the question is, there are some folks with the perception of, well, what does it matter, right? It's
sure. Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's my discardables, right?
I'm not doing anything illegal. So what's the
it provides me free stuff, so take it. It's like my garbage. If you want to go, if you can make money off of it, fine. I don't need it anymore. I just I think that there are. And I think this goes back to something else you're saying, that within these Silicon Valley companies, there are graduate schools dedicated to the attention economy and keeping people hooked on your platform by design.
Right. And it's not just the attention economy; it's the economy of surveillance capitalism.
Yep.
And these are important things that we need to be aware of, and then we need to think about, in what space around these things do we want to advocate. Certainly, in terms of being aware of what's going on, but hopefully, helping students be able to look at the ethical issues that are present here and thinking about those, and being prepared to move into that kind of environment, right? Working with data, working with technology, but hopefully being able to bring a strong ethical framework to bear in these environments, and not to be value neutral, and allow some bad things to be done with these powerful tools that are increasingly in more and more hands.
Yep.
All right. Well, hey, let's wrap up with some Geeks of the Week, and we appreciate Scott and Peggy being with us, and anyone else who has joined us. And let's see, look at that. I can click, even in my iPad, Scott, I can click show. At some point I was able to knight Peggy with the ability to put links in live, and I don't know how to do that. Otherwise I would make put Scott in there. But anyway, Scott's got an article in there, which I'll put in the show notes, about Amazon and Ring using their cameras from doornails to create a law enforcement network. Yes, isn't that lovely? Well, I will say that thanks to Dave, we have not had the security show. Sometimes Jason and I can descend into a lot of discussion about the surveillance environment and security and things like that. So I'm going to move some of those articles to next week because there are some important and good things to talk about. But let's get out of here because we're past the top of the hour. What is your Geek of the Week, Dave? And then I will share mine as well.
So I wanted to put Doug Belshaw's Thought Shrapnel on people's radar. My go-to read of the week that he shares out. He's also got Thought Shrapnel Daily, curation of incredibly thoughtful links with Doug's immense insight. I'm a subscriber. Would encourage other people to do so as well, because I just think it's really high quality, thoughtful work from one of the most progressive and forward thinking people in the EdTech space. So I learn something every time I read it. I'm better off for it, and just wanted to share it with the Situation Room audience.
Awesome. And Doug Belshaw's podcast, Tide, Today in Digital Education, is also a great listen. I've got that on my Pocket Cast subscription. So I didn't know about Thought Shrapnel, though. So awesome to know about that. I'm, as usual, exploiting my opportunity to do a Geek of the Week, doing 3, but they'll be quick. Boeing has a really great video that was shared by Destin on Smarter Every Day. It's called Airbus, We're Glad You're Here. Some in the comments pointed out, yes, because of antitrust or monopoly, whatever, maybe Boeing wouldn't be able to compete in the way they are if Airbus wasn't. But it's really, I think, a classy, video. It's a birthday video. It's clever, and it'd be worth showing to students and talking about. Also, being aware of what's going on with Airbus and Boeing and aircraft, things like that. There's been a lot of current events around that. Wonderful, wonderful publication from Google. Just saw this today. It's called 8 Emerging Trends for K-12 Education from Google. I have not read the entire thing, but I have been reading some of it, and I love how they not only have survey results and trends that they've identified sort of from thought leaders, but they've got articles from journals that provide additional recommended reading on the topics, and digital responsibility and digital citizenship, one of the things, and I'm definitely going to be checking out those articles. Kind of reminds a little bit of the Horizon report, which I don't think is actually produced anymore, and they had Horizon K-12, but it's valuable to take a look at, what people are seeing as emerging trends, and then thinking about the ways we may or may not be, planning for those, accommodating for those, orienting towards those in our schools. And then finally, this was also in a Google Education email blast that came out today. Rivet, hadn't heard of this. It's completely free if you teach K1 or 2, kindergarten, first or second grade students. There's over 2,000 leveled free books available in Rivet, and it's an app as well as a website. And we're always trying to get our kids to be more excited about reading and have more reading opportunities. And with that being completely free without any kind of subscription, relative to some of the other options that we're using, that sounds pretty good. So when you're not here on the EdTech Situation Room, Dave, where can people find you and continue to learn with you? And what links would you like people to check out? Bookmark.
Best way to get a hold of me is on Twitter, at EduQuinn. Also would like to put in a side plug for, I don't know if registration is still open, I have to check. Summer Institute in Digital Literacy at the University of Rhode Island. I'll be there this summer for a day or two, talking a little bit about Mike Caulfield's work. The other thing I'd love for folks to check out is our district does a monthly author interview series called MURSD Leads. We've had Yang Zhao, Jal Mehta, Tony Wagner, just to name a few on. Next, we just wrapped up In Search of Deeper Learning this past month. I'll put in the show notes. But next, for next year, we've got Elliot Washer, John Warner, and again, Mike Caulfield as our 3 authors for the fall. Dates and notification will be coming out. So check out those 2 opportunities. We also welcome people who want to join us in the conversation, who would like to be part of the interview panel. Again, reach out. We'd love to have you.
All right. Well, fantastic. Well, I am W. Fryer on Twitter. My blog, speedofcreativity.org. And yeah, looking forward to a few more weeks of work and then passing the baton of technology director and trying to follow your wonderful lead there with instructional technology, Dave. And I'm going to be focusing on innovation and technology integration coaching with our teachers next year. So excited about that. Want to encourage you again to check out edtechsr.com for all of the show notes and links that we referenced tonight. Please follow us on Twitter at edtechsr. Next week, I think Jason will be back, but rumor has it that Dan Krutka, Dr. Krutka from Dallas, Fort Worth area, is going to be joining us, a great social studies teacher and teacher educator. And we look forward to that. We'll be having a couple changes with some different travels and things like that happening in the summer. So if you follow us on Twitter at EdTechSR, you can keep track of all that. So thank you for tuning in. Thanks to Scott and Peggy for joining us live in the chat room. And we will see you again next week on Wednesday night, same time, same place, most likely, 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Mountain, 7 p.m. Pacific. If it's UTC, it's really early in the morning. It's like 3 a.m. So you're probably not tuning in from there. But whenever you are tuning in, we'd love to hear your feedback. And we want to thank you for listening or watching the EdTech Situation Room.